Good morning, everybody. So please, you can come in, all the panelists. Right, I'm happy to see a room that is pretty filled at this time of the day. Good. Right, so this panel talks about the AI Act and why does it matter for the XR community. So the AI Act, you will see, it's a new legislation from the European community. And so here we are here to discuss specifically in this community what does it mean and what are the targets. So I will start by introducing myself. So I'm Andrea Bravo. I'm the founder of Metaverse Ethics, which is an initiative and newsletter that democratizes technical topics on data privacy, policy, and ethics for the XR community. And now we can jump on to Kai.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kai. Thanks for having me. I'm the CEO at Union Avatars. Basically, what we do is we help gamers and users to create avatars that can be used in multiple platforms. So it can be used across platforms. We use machine learning to generate 3D avatars from 2D selfie pictures using different models that we have been training.
Marine?
Good morning. I'm Marine Boulot. I run communications for Improbable, which is a British Metaverse company. I also spearhead our advocacy efforts, let's say, for the Metaverse by running the think tank we launched, which is called the Metaverse Society.
Please, Iveta.
Hello, everyone. My name is Iveta Lohovska, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for AI and HPC at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. HPC standing for High Performance Compute, so everything that powers the most powerful algorithms, AI applications, and XR technology. And I mainly develop algorithms going into the different applications for high-stake, complex scenarios.
And we have Chad Wollen.
Yep, Chad Wollen. I'm a managing partner at the Privacy Experience Agency. We advise companies facing commercial and customer challenges from digital and data regulation around the world. And I also serve as the co-chair of the Privacy, Cybersecurity and Identity Working Group of the Metaverse Standards Forum.
Thank you. So the European Union proposed AI Act aims to oversee the development and deployment of AI technologies in the European Union. Now, it targets developers. How many developers, XR developers, are there in this room? Please raise your hand. Okay, so it's good that you're here today. And it also targets XR companies developing new solutions. So how many XR companies developing solutions here? Okay. So I can see half of this room is targeted with the AI Act. So please pay attention to what our panelists will just say. Now, I will start with Marine. Can you introduce in a nutshell what the AI Act is?
So it's a long and complex story. So to make it short, so we should be very pleased that there is a comprehensive piece of regulation about AI, and this one is stemming from Europe, as has been the case for GDPR. So compared to what is currently available in the US or in the UK, at least it gives a framework, a complex framework to navigate, arguably, but there is something that exists and that we can try to work through and navigate as you are developing your products. So the AI Act basically plans for AI systems in 4 buckets, from the unacceptable risk to the lower risk. So the first thing is trying to understand where you fall, right? And then in terms of implementation calendar, the unacceptable things should start being implemented, regulated, watched over from February 2025, and then it's going to go until the middle August 2027. So there is a bit of time to get organized. But again, the AI Act is both an innovative piece of regulation, but also something that gives a framework that needs to be navigated for when we develop AI systems within extended reality.
Right, thank you, Marine. So you told about a risk level-based approach. So Chad, will you be able to tell us a bit about these flavors that the AI Act brings?
Sure. in lots of ways, we should be very familiar with risk-based approaches in Europe. All the main digital regulation that the European Union has produced is kind of founded on a risk-based approach alongside a rights-based approach. But let's focus on risk. So in the legislation, they prohibit a number of use cases and purposes for AI. So things like social scoring, anything that might manipulate or create subliminal influencing that causes people to make decisions that might harm themselves or others, social scoring, emotional prediction, profiling people to see if they might commit crimes. These things are all like way off the charts in terms of risk for AI and prohibited. Then you have what they call in their Annex 3 a high-risk areas. That's things like employment, how HR uses. It's anything to do with educational and vocational training, which I know is probably something that a lot of you are thinking about, because there might be scoring or assessments which the AI could get wrong, anything to do with biometrics, anything to do with critical infrastructure as well, are the things that the European Union is targeting and thinking about as high risk. But then more broadly, and I'll wrap up in a second, really what they're also saying is anything that might harm our health, our physical health, our mental health, our overall well-being that AI will impact, that should be thought of as high risk. Anything that involves product safety, and particularly involves critical components, safety components, and again, back to training in some industries, like say pharmaceuticals, training is a critical safety component. And so that any AI involvement in that might be involved, might be high risk. And then also anything that affects, as European citizens, our fundamental rights, such as data protection, the right to a private life, to dignity, to autonomy. So, I mean, I could carry on, but I'll
That's fine for now.
draw an end there.
And thank you, Chad. Iveta, can you bring us the link that there is between AI that Ori yesterday in the opening keynote announced and XR? What is this link between AI and XR?
Well, the best way for me to explain is to give a few examples. But the foundation, so I'm a principal data scientist, and the foundational layer between AI, XR, and the applications that glue everything together is data. You cannot have XR or AI without having data foundations, and data is the most important asset in this conversation. So there are few examples, at least from my experience, basically developing algorithms that goes into those applications, into this kind of software, is everything to do with different modalities. So we have exhausted text in the recent years as a modality for feeding data into the applications, into the algorithms, and now we are purely focusing on also the AI Act as well, is into different modalities. And in my language, modalities is everything around sensory, images, voice, emotions, heartbeat, so bodies data and this kind of information, which could be collected by the XR hardware technology and then fed into the algorithms and improve the experience. A few examples that I'm working on and I've been working on in the past is, for example, creating simulations for pilots or for pediatricians, so the doctors that execute the most complex, rare pediatric operations. We do simulations and trainings, and we collect through eye tracking technology or through different kinds of sensors within the VR experience, how they feel, what's the stress level they experience, how much they sweat, heart rate, and we try to improve the experience in practicing either very complex flights or very complex, very rare operations. So those are just a few examples of
Right.
also high-risk scenarios, exactly what you've described. They go under the AI Act because one is defense and military and the other one is healthcare.
Right, thank you, Iveta. So data is the link. Now, Marine, I will tell you to develop a bit on what I said before. How does the AI Act target specifically our community, the XR community?
But again, yes, it's going to be essentially on either the sector that you're working upon. So if you're in healthcare, if you're in defense, military, autonomous systems, etc., or in education, and then it's going to tie to, yes, which biometrics are you using? In which bucket do you fall? Is this going to be considered very high risk, not so high risk, up to the lower one? And then you really need to try to understand the foreseeable consequences of either the use of the data or basically the impact that it could have. So it's the harder thing, because you will maybe imagine, okay, but I'm collecting those data, but it's just to improve my product. Yes, but if the data is not collected properly, ultimately it's going to mean that we don't want necessarily to know that a kind of user, a bucket of users who have this very particular political opinion or who have that kind of ethnicity do have a pattern. And as soon as you can infer from the data, that's when you get basically in trouble. So that's where, even though it's difficult whilst you develop a product, you always need to put yourself in the shoes of, in a few years back, what's going to happen with that kind of use case and what that kind of data collection.
Chad, I saw that you wanted to jump on that.
I was going to add, I mean, data is really, really important in the AI Act, but it also is full of references to the GDPR. So it's subservient to the GDPR in terms of data collection and data processing. I suppose the way to think about the way the AI Act deals with data is to think about the fact that XR opens up huge amounts of new data sets at huge kind of sizes, and the analysis of that, the kind of creating the value for the consumer and for the business requires really quite a lot of heavy lifting from AI, particularly around pattern recognition, around classification of objects. And maybe if we start to think a little bit about particularly AR, and thinking about all the augmentation of human senses that AR might bring along with cameras, with sound, with all sorts of things that the mind cannot filters out at the moment, that these computing systems will capture and record and store. Not today, because there's a lot of caution about this, but in terms of the technological trajectory, there is a clear line towards much more ambient data collection, and that requires AI. And that's about the GDPR, but also about the AI Act.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Kai, can you offer us an example, for example, in your startup of application of AI systems?
Yeah, I would say in our specific case, maybe we fall more into everything related to the biometric data. Basically, since we create the 3D avatars from these 2D selfie pictures, we are, let's say, playing on this limit on which is the biometric data that we are capturing. So far, we have been working with lawyers to make sure that we don't keep any sensitive data like pictures or things like this, so we still have a certain grade of not specific data related to the creation of the avatar, or how is the output related to the original picture. There's still some deviations on that, but I think it's important, especially in the future when everything related to identity can fit to your virtual projection and all the risks associated with that.
So just to make it clear for the audience, in your application, so when there's the use of AI, what is the process for the user eventually to create the avatar? Can you walk us through?
Yeah, I mean, basically they upload a picture, and then we take this picture, and based on the different points that we get from the picture, the face points, we are able to generate from scratch a head, like a realistic head. But then we delete the original picture, and then talking with the lawyers, we don't get enough data points as to make it a representation of the biometric data of the user so far. But again, like, I think there is still some risk on how you validate the identity behind the avatar, and how this can generate some frictions in the future if, let's say, that's a validation enough to do some actions that can impact on the original identity of the person.
Exactly. So any comments on this? For example, Iveta, would you have any comments on?
Well, this is the use of AI within the XR industry, where you can just improve the knowledge worker work and productivity through the use of those algorithms and tools where you generate images or puppets. And I think the biggest area of opportunity I see, again, coming from mainly the framing of where AI plays a bigger role and could be interesting for you, is education, training, enhancing human capabilities. But again, everything around education and HR also is in the high-risk area. So I'm definitely very curious how this is going to roll out, because I see the highest impact, highest opportunity levels, but also not very well clarified within the AI Act. And it's still to be seen how exactly this will be articulated or executed.
Exactly. So bringing about other use cases, because you mentioned education, HR, before Chad, you mentioned pharmaceutical and even marine healthcare. What other examples can you bring that are meaningful to our community, marine, for example?
So I guess you could imagine, if we take the headsets that are currently existing, so where there is not so much risk, between brackets, is that you still have that in your living room. You're not going out, and you're in a relatively closed environment. Yes, AI is in there. Yes, there is data collection. There is AI that will make recommendations, and that's where it starts being tricky. You could imagine that even, it's quite subtle, but if it starts deciding that there are things in the world that you don't like to see, so maybe you don't need to see them, so it's starting to influence, basically, your game, your experience, your training session, whatever. But then, if you look forward and you go into more, you know, the Ray-Ban glasses, etc., so you're outside. So then, indeed, as Chad mentioned, you get into the camera also angle, right? So it's not only AI about what you see, what you can do, it's also collecting. And that becomes, in my view, quite tricky and something that certainly the regulators should think about, because then basically the AI is your lens. And that becomes a bit of a slightly dystopian world.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Chad, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I suppose back to the overarching goals of this law in the European Union and the other digital single market goals is to create success for you guys and to drive growth and product uptake. The European Union believes that the fundamental kind of platform for that is trust, that you have to create trust in the marketplace. And one of the things that brought me into the XR world was looking at 20, almost 30 years of web mistakes around transparency, around accountability, around bringing customers into a world where they understand what's going on with these technologies. And I'm really hoping that as an industry that we learn from those mistakes, like around the AI Act, around the GDPR, and that when we think about implementing these technologies, what we're doing is thinking about transparency, we're thinking about governance, and we're thinking about accountability, and having a conversation with our customers and our users about the benefits that these technologies bring to them, and not hiding it, not being embarrassed about it, not turning it into a dirty secret we don't want to talk about it, because it is immensely important and highly beneficial to the users and yourselves.
Yeah, so having the conversation, so that's why we're here. Iveta, how can you explain us a bit at HPE? What are some examples where you have been using AI with eventually XR and supercomputers?
Yeah, so again, my perspective is coming from very high complex, high computational intensive use cases and environments. I mentioned a few examples when it comes to healthcare, where I definitely see how we should be pushing the needle to improve the patient's experience, but also to reduce stress around the healthcare system. Some of the use cases are just very advanced trainings for doctors, simulations for those doctors, and the medical workforce, because we all know we live in Europe and we are aging very fast. So there is more and more need for this industry, and I see, because I come from the enterprise, huge opportunity for development and also for the startups and the companies to work in this space. Another area is defense, so everything around defense and nations protection. Advanced XR use cases and technology is something that we are also working on when it comes to just helicopter flights or pilot simulations is as well a lot of work in this direction. So there are two other areas. Climate simulations and digital twins of everything around sustainable data sets, simulations of the airflow, of the simulations of the Earth, and all the different parameters as well. Also bringing this closer to, I would call it the end user or the average citizens. Are also applications that I see a lot of opportunities. And then again, education. This is my favorite one, coming from the perspective of AI, where we have such a huge job disruption, where we are automating jobs, changing people's jobs. If you're developers, you would be dealing with CI/CD pipelines and having code generation and code translation tools. So augmenting this experience or improving this is something that we are also working on. And I assume you have been observing and following closely, as I'm also kind of a very sloppy developer. So I see how much AI and also some of the XR applications are improving my skills as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting because you brought about the idea of course, AI changing jobs, but XR is changing jobs, thanks to virtual training, thanks to simulation, thanks to also remote assistance. Now, let's bring, for example, about education. Marine, in the context of education, how would you eventually look at the AI Act and specific applications for education in XR?
Well, I guess it's a matter of if you look at the benefit for indeed people to start to learn, and we know how great and immersive these environments can be. Then, of course, again, it's going to be a matter of how where the buyers can enter into this sort of training and content that people will be learning with. And then you've got, again, all of the biometrics and everything that is being captured as part of these sessions to understand exactly, if this is going beyond what is necessary for a good learning experience, and if we don't want that, a given group of users behave exactly this or that way. So as part of the AI Act, what would happen for developers is, again, trying to understand where they fit, where is the level of risk, and then assess, with the right governance scheme and the right mapping, okay, this is where I fall and I should be mindful of this. And then for the larger organizations, of course, they can enter the AI Pact, which is basically a proactive approach within the AI Act to come to the regulator and discuss openly, okay, I have this use case, I'd like to do this and that. But of course, it's easier when you're a very large organization with a lot of resources and competent people than when you're a startup.
So it's very interesting because you bring the two perspectives on, of course, smaller companies, big companies. Chad, for example, if you were a small company, small, medium-sized company, where would you start?
In the education space?
Yes.
Yeah. So
For VR training, for example.
Oh, VR training. Okay. So I suppose Marine's point about the regulatory sandbox
Right.
is a really important one. So the AI Act sets up what's called a regulatory sandbox, and that's a space where you can go with your ideas around AI and your products and your services while they're still in development, and have a discussion with regulators around how they're working, how they might work in the future, what are the impacts they might have, and how you might mitigate those impacts. So that's a really important first step. I mean, the law says you should have this dialogue, and it's very rare that you get access to regulatory opinion at a detailed level, so you should definitely take that up. I would also say in the broad education space, so maybe less about adults and training, when we're talking about children are a huge priority for regulators in the data and digital space, and they are looking at how the internet is working for children. So there's a lot of things like in the UK, the age-appropriate design code, in Ireland, the fundamentals for children, in California, the age-appropriate design code as well, looking at how you create experiences and products and services that children are going to use, and not removing functionality, not dumbing them down, because one of the principles is that children should have the same experience and have access to the same experiences that we all have in order to enrich their lives, to play, to create, to live. And it's up to us to make those spaces safe, not up to us to just cut them out of the picture. So starting and thinking about children and their interests and what the risks are is really important, not just for the children, but also because there's a lot of regulatory scrutiny on that area at the moment.
So thank you for bringing this issue of caring about children. Kai, have you thought about these with regards to the avatar you create, or Iveta, could you give eventually some further examples? We start with Kai.
Yeah, no, in our specific case, we don't allow minors to generate avatars if they are not under the care of some adult. We have been doing some things specifically like for schools or things like this, but then when we do this, basically we create like a closed environment for them, and then we make sure to delete all the avatars and everything after it's done. We are still seeing what's the approach, what we can do, and how we can advance, so we don't have to get them out of the picture. That's what we are doing basically now, I would say. But yeah, that's a little bit the way to go.
Okay, Iveta, would you have some examples here?
Not an example, but I have a concrete recommendation. And it took us, the AI community, a bit to mature on how we think of risk, how we think of regulations in this space. You know, algorithms are very complex things. They become more and more powerful. We didn't create anything new, but maybe you heard of AI ethics, and that we struggle to give definitions and to align which ethics and what are the different ethics of a company, of a team, of an enterprise or a nation. So my concrete recommendation in AI within the XR community is set your set of principles, of guardrails, like the same as the doctors have code of conduct. Create the code of conduct for the XR community. That will be your guiding Nordic star. They don't have to be a lot. You can look around what exists already. It helped us a lot to work in high-impact, high-visibility use cases with the right mindset, with the right technology, with the right guardrails in place. We stole these from the same way doctors operate, and I don't know where you are in this journey, but I would assume there are a lot of similarities in the way you work and develop applications and experiences, that code of conduct for the XR community and the use of AI within your application would be something very helpful to deal with the AI Act.
Wow, I love this, Iveta. Thanks for bringing up this idea of a code of conduct for our community. Now, Chad, what would you like to bring to this code of conduct?
Well, just to be a legal pedant for a moment, do we mean an actual code of conduct, as in the law, say a GDPR code of conduct, which have, while excellent tools have not really taken off, the industries have not really. A code of conduct under the GDPR is a recognized industry-specific version of the GDPR where a trade association or a trade body works with its members and the regulator to create a version of the GDPR that's unique to its context. And that's what.
Okay, thanks for bringing this in.
So that's an official code of conduct, but then of course there are also voluntary standards,
and
voluntary
the community
codes.
code of conduct, yes.
But I thought what you also said that was really interesting is the process where a business takes the principles of the law and understands how they operate, how they work in their operational context, and makes it their own. Makes it their own in terms of what they're doing and also their brand and their values, and then turn that into policies, and then really importantly enforce those policies. I mean, a lot around all of this regulation is about, is it enforced sufficiently? Well, actually, enforcement doesn't just start with regulators. It also starts in your own business, showing that you're actually serious about upholding the values and the principles that you have said are important to your business in the world of AI or in data processing.
Mm-hmm. Marine, would you like to add something?
Yeah, the AI Act, again, it's a framework. It's not meant to slow down innovation. It's not meant to scare off developers. So indeed, the best way to approach it is most likely to engage into a dialogue, either the regulatory sandbox or to have, and B2B companies oftentimes will have more of the approach of setting up their own code of conduct. But it's, again, trying to foresee the consequences of what you're developing in terms of technology, in terms of data collection, and then trying to make sense out of it. Go to the industry associations, discuss with peers, because in my experience, the regulators really like to have industry players coming to them, telling them, yes, I have this problem, or I can see this coming. Mm-hmm. And this is most likely the best approach. And they will be, yes, most sensitive to consumer protection, as you said, because that's an obvious one, especially in the EU, and potentially, harmful uses. But that's the unacceptable or super high-risk use cases. In general, will be properly handled because the companies working on it are also more advanced than, a startup that will try to have just a very cool product for consumers, which is normal. So it's the catch-up between these different levels of maturity, I guess, which is going to be really interesting.
Exactly. Charlie?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on what you were saying about developers and development. Like the GDPR, the AI Act also has a very strong view about its implementation in the context of a product lifecycle. So it really wants you to think about the implications of the AI that you're implementing as early on as possible in your development process, so that you're starting at first principles in day one, just like the GDPR through data protection by design and by default is asking you to do those things at the first instance. And that's often because, again, in the unlikely situation that you get into regulatory trouble, what regulators ask is, well, why didn't you think about this at the start? Mm-hmm. You were starting a product, you know what the law says, you could have just thought about this at the beginning, and then you wouldn't have had this problem all the way through at the end, and you're now trying to kind of kludge something together. Now, so again, it's really important to start embedding this kind of thinking into your product and service development process and document it and show that you are making the right decisions all the way through, so that you have evidence that you have thought about this and you've considered it and that you're making the decisions on a correct and reasonable basis.
Right from the start.
Right
That's
from
very
the
well
start.
said.
Day
exactly.
one.
And that's why we're here, because the law just got approved now in August. And so we have some time to reflect in our companies. How can we apply this? And how can we have the conversations? Kai, how have you had with your developers in your company conversations on bringing in, for example, not the AI Act because it just passed, but GDPR, just to give an example?
Yeah, I mean, as Chad was mentioning, I think, like, fortunately, we already have the GDPR pretty clear, I would say, on place. So I think a lot of things relay more on the GDPR than on the AI Act, at least for now in our specific case. As we are also touching some data parts, we don't acquire a lot of data from the users, but we still have some data from them. I think it's important to always be aware on how you give like exit possibilities to the users, options to control their own data, be aware of what you as a company own on their data part. But yeah, I think it's important to have a little bit of like a room for experimentation. I understand what you were mentioning, that some of the big companies can interact on the different sandbox and options with regulators to like update or to make a little bit better the AI Act. But I think it's also important to give room for the innovation, especially for startups that maybe don't have this power or these thousands of different use cases and this knowledge that big corporations have, but they still can drive some innovation that we didn't see before.
Absolutely. So if we were to address some questions to you policymakers, to take specifically into account the XR community, what would that be? Chad, you were.
Okay. I suppose, and this is, I think, a lesson from the digital single market regulation more generally, but somehow the AI Act really focuses the mind, and that is to be really clear that you need to be thinking all the time about your end users and the impact on them. I think in the AI Act, it's not necessarily as clear as it should be, and that's not to say it's not hidden in the text, but policymakers need to be really clear about how important it is that you think about your customers all the way through that life cycle and all the way through that process, and that it's their rights, it's their safety, it's their health that you're thinking about, and how you protect that and how you facilitate their rights. Really, really very, very important to build that trust. And also think about respect. I mean, we often don't talk about trust in our work with clients. We talk about respect for the customers, because ultimately that's what they want. They want you to respect them by treating them like adults, giving them the correct information, and allowing them to make informed decisions. And if your proposition is good enough, they'll say yes to what you're asking.
Thank you. Iveta?
I liked the way that you said several times that it's a framework of thinking, and it is really a framework of thinking. So it's not something that tries to stop you. And I would never think of big enterprises, tech enterprises, as me representing one more advanced. Actually, this cannot be further from the truth in the AI, and I assume in the XR world, because they were very small niche players working 24/7 on developing something cool that big companies are simply not focusing on. So you have a lot to say to the policymakers, to advise. They're quite open to hear. Actually, more focused to hear from the smaller communities and group of developers, because let's just remember, they didn't have Gen AI under consideration, and they had to stop the release of the AI Act, because when ChatGPT came into play, they were like, oh, we missed LLMs because we had no idea it exists and we did not regulate it. So I'm sure you come up with something cool that they even didn't think of putting into the AI Act, and just go challenge them well intentionally, or challenge the industry or the community. And I'm sure it will be well received, because the idea of the AI Act is just a way of thinking and aligning between our common values, and just targeting the high risk and the forbidden ones is communicating properly with the institutions and the end users that you're doing it, but there's nothing scary or something that's slowing you down.
I think that's a really good point, because in fact, a lot of the AI, well, quite a bit of the AI Act is powers for the Commission to update itself.
Yes.
To say we don't know everything, but we now take the power to be able to amend the Act and change the Act in life, in flight, because stuff happens that we can't predict.
Exactly. And that's why here also at AWE we have a say, and that's why you should be involved also to get this feedback from the Commission. Please go ahead, Chad.
Oh, no, that was just my
Okay.
I just want to give one concrete example to what you said and what I said is, maybe in the AI Act, there's this kind of a clear number that's 10 to the power of 25 compute that you'd be using to train algorithms. And I'm in the business of pushing those boundaries, and I know exactly which year, which month we'll break that line in the AI Act. So I'm going to go and tell the AI Act people in the EU that they have to change it, because next year we will have a new baseline.
Great example.
And this is an example you can use for yourself as well.
Marine, what would you bring forward?
No, I fully concur. I mean, it's not meant to be scary. It's meant to be, on the contrary, something that, again, we should rejoice that there is something existing here that gives a sense of predictability for when you develop a product. You're not going to get from one day to the other, an executive order that is going to say this is entirely forbidden. So you can engage into a dialogue that should be a constructive one, and that is meant to give some reassurance to, okay, I want to do things right. The issue, again, is developers will develop because we love technology, and a cool thing, a cool application, we will never resist to develop. And then we don't necessarily think about, okay, but this used in a different context, etc., could be, potentially a problematic use of it. So that's why it really needs to exist, the dialogue. And even if startups are smaller, engaging, as you said, Iveta, I mean, they really enjoy the fact that you proactively reach out and say, and they want to hear from the people who will develop for the citizens, because they don't know the technology. They just are excited. They just want to protect us all.
Exactly. Thank you, Marina. Kai, what's your thoughts?
I would just, I think it's really interesting to have this discussion and this dialogue, as they are mentioning. Unfortunately, sometimes regulation comes really after the technology, as she was saying, as Marie was saying, we love to develop, so sometimes we don't think on the broader idea of how it can affect other modalities from what we are doing. But I think it's important to keep this talk open so we can be aware of where it's going, what can be done, and what not.
Yeah, exactly. So we'd love to develop, we love to create extra solutions that serves our clients, customers, also consumers. And so here at AWE, let's talk. It's great that you're here because we are talking about and having this conversation, because in the end, it's about building trust to our consumers, also towards the regulators, also towards the community. What the XR community is doing is at focus. And as all our panelists were saying, it's a framework. It's a way of thinking about it. It's a way of engaging in a dialogue with regulators, because we will push these boundaries that they have created on paper. So let's start now having this conversation and engage in this new way of thinking, because it's not a barrier, again, it's a framework. And so with that said, I would like to open now the floor for some questions of the audience and engage more in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the interesting round there. I have a question for Kai. Could you put a price tag on what it costs, like to pay the lawyers, to pay for the documentation, to get basically your company, your product ready for the AI Act? Do you have a broad range? What you expect in terms of cost?
So, can you repeat? Sorry, I cannot hear it really good. How much it take for the lawyers?
Yeah, how much do you think do you have to pay like in a year to make sure that your product is like safe for AI Act? So you need to pay lawyers, you need to pay the guy writing the documentation. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say that a big part of our budget is for lawyers right now, and they are not cheap, unfortunately. But I think it's really important, especially if you're moving in this field, to make sure that everything you are doing is on place. No? I always try to work with lawyers that are possibilists, in the sense that I like my lawyers to tell me how to do things, not to tell me that I cannot do things. So I think this comes from the regulators or other figures on the space. So what I like from the lawyers is to help me trying to reach the goal that I want. But then at the same time, you have to be always like updating terms, anything related to the technology that you are building, because at the end of the day, it's a technology that is evolving a lot too. So yeah, definitely we spend a lot of time talking with lawyers, finding different options to do what we want to do.
I say it was a bit of a trick question, because you just said what I wanted to hear, because it is what it is. Because you have to pay a lot of money, not just for AI Act, but also for GDPR, and there's other regulations going on. As a startup, because the EU is talking a lot of startup and innovation. As a startup, how are you supposed to pay that? Because, as you said, you should start doing this documentation before you write your first line of code, because you should think about the user first and then start developing, because otherwise you have to basically backtrack your work and then redo the documentation. How are startups supposed to finance that? Because grants in Germany, rich country, are like 100K, 200K, and if a big amount of that cash is already going to lawyers first, why would I even start up in Germany instead of going to a different country? Are we not stopping innovation?
So it's for me? Oh, yeah, you want to?
No, go.
No, so in our case, what we did is like we tried to find like a lawyer or a lawyer firm that really believe in the innovation in technology. So we try to build a long-term relationship with them in a way where you can really set up prices based on the stage that you are on the company. And if you find somebody who really believes on what you're doing, I mean, anyway, you can play with other things like phantom shares or other value from your company that you can give them. But I think it's important to have a partner who really believes on what you're doing and try to adapt to the stage that you are. I would say at the same time, like, it's not the same going for a startup or for a company in general, going from 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to 100. So you have to be finding the right person for each one of the stage. So maybe you can start talking to a friend that can give you a hand, but then looking for a proper lawyer firm, for me, has been one of the most important parts. I agree that it's a big part of the budget, but it's also one of the most sensitive parts of the company, so it's important to have something in place.
And also, so there's a question of where you develop, but there's a question of where you sell. If you want to target European consumers, you have no other option but to comply, basically, by the rule.
Can I add something?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that also we need to stop thinking about this as something you give to lawyers all the time.
Yeah.
As that's not necessarily the only answer to all these questions. You said something really important, which was starting with your customer. So you need to start expanding the definition of your customer to include AI, to include data more obviously. You also need to just think about some very simple things like data quality. It's in the AI Act. It's one of the things we kept tripping over with our clients with the GDPR, that they don't have a good view of data quality. So much falls into place if you really put in practice the technical and business processes around data quality as well. And that's not, you don't need a lawyer to tell you that. And it's something that helps you forevermore. So I would say let's also say that lawyers are important, but there are a whole load of other ways of being compliant and meeting the requirements of the law that don't involve lawyers.
Thank you for the question. I think it was very interesting to highlight these tensions that there are between innovation and how can we take eventually this regulation into account with a budget that you need to manage. Any other questions? We have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for enlightening us with your wisdom. So I have a question about data, from user data, basically, because we are creating like a AI companion application in which the user can interact and share their feelings, thoughts, and experience. And my question goes to the best practices to handle that data, because you have like a spectrum in which you can have it in OpenAI and they have all the data, or have it in the company, or have it like in the application and the data stays in the device of the user or something like that. Is there like a best practice that could be pursued from the start, because we are like in a very early stage? So just curious to see what paths to go.
Can I?
Yeah,
Okay. So there are no best practices in the industry. So this should give you some level of comfort in the way you're choosing your strategy if you're starting greenfield. But that's why I said that you need to have some kind of a guiding framework in the way you design your data ops. So there are no practices in terms of the best practices, and everyone is doing a different thing. Even if you go into OpenAI or similar companies, you see that the main leaders of and representatives of this company don't know how data has been handled or which data has been used, which shows weaknesses when you deal with huge volume and variety of data sets. My advice would be have a data ops process in place. Just put a couple of frameworks, mainly open source, because you don't have to pay high-end databases and frameworks and ETLs to be able to start building on top of that, but have that in mind. Proper data ops and ML ops framework in place that is modular, Kubernetes or containers or something similar that can scale with you scaling your business and application is something very standard and basic thing. So basically investing in a Kubernetes resources and also data ops framework. Some of the open source tools will help you a lot. Is a good starting point. And I wouldn't worry more, because I can tell you everyone is doing this in different shape and form, big or small, and it should be sufficient to keep you ahead for a long time. That would be my very practical. Yeah, no clear standards of how you should be setting up the environment.
Thank you, Iveta. Do we have any other question? The last burning question for today here in this panel?
There were 2 more people who were...
Yes, okay. Standing, exactly.
Hello. I'm basically rereading an article from, well, it's a US journalist, you probably know him, Stratechery, and in which he mentions that the EU regulation goes too far.
Goes too far?
Goes too far,
okay.
Yes. For me, it's his opinion. It's not. There are some things basically you can agree, others you can't. I'm just going to focus on my concern. It's a personal concern, so it's not. I want to see how the AI Act is different from the GDPR experience for the user. So right now, when you go to a website here in Europe, you have basically all the all of the pop-up menus, right? And if you go to the US and you would use their menus, basically his argument is that the market basically assumed that having personal information is a security breach, so basically we should pay better providers, third providers to help us in that service, and that the EU got stuck in the vision of the internet of the last 15 years. And so my concern, I mean, the problem with technology is that you say, we want to develop, we want to innovate, we want to go forward, we want to push things ahead. And and sometimes the regulation is good for perhaps being better for the big players that developed before, probably us, and they actually they'd done their models and then whatever. and then we get stuck in these, as the first colleague asked, we get stuck in these parts of lawyers, understanding regulations, understanding things, and then we cannot push our ideas ahead. So this is a concern. It's not exactly a question, but as...
It's more a reflection.
It's more of a reflection, but I would like to understand their opinion.
I was going to take a cue from yesterday where we were told to think about history a bit more. So one of the decisions that was made when the European Economic Community became the European Union was that as an institution and a collection of countries, we're more than just markets and transactions. And I say we as a British person who is sad that we've left, and that there was a conscious decision that actually Europe is a social Europe, and that we start with our citizens and their rights, and that those things are more important than transactions. And that has become a golden thread all the way through all European legislation, is its relationship with the Fundamental Charter of Rights, which, you know, the US has a Charter of Rights, but it's very different from the European one. So in that respect, the difference is about a political and social vision, not individual laws. And then just one point on a micro thing.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, now it's time to wrap up.
Oh, wrap up.
So, yes. Thank you, every one of you, for coming here, for engaging in this conversation. And now, please wait for the next session that is coming up in short. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.